divergent. And while the exit polls had predicted that Kamala Harris would edge Donald Trump in this hotly contested election, the reality is turning out to be very, very different. Take a look at the snapshot of the current voting trends, and a large number of states were expected to vote along party lines, and that's how it's panned out. The tally, as things stand at 12 o'clock local time in India, is 247 to 214. 270, remember, is the midpoint, and that is what you need to win the election for the President of the United States. Now, let's talk about how things have panned out, because if we can pull up the map of the election, at some point over the course of this half hour, hopefully we'll be able to give you a snapshot of the map of the United States. And usually what happens is that voters in the United States vote along party lines. For example, Florida on the East Coast, at the bottom of the United States of America, on the East Coast, votes usually in favor of Republican. On the other coast, you have California, which has as many as 40 electoral votes. That state generally votes Democrat, and that's exactly what has panned out. But heading into the election, the crucial battles were set to be in the so-called swing states, where votes could go either way. And right till the last day, yesterday, the two presidential candidates were campaigning heavily, trying to influence voters in those regions. What are they? I'm going to name them: Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. And as things stand right now, you've already had a result that's been called in North Carolina in favor of Donald Trump, and in several of the key swing states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, as well as Georgia, even in Arizona and Wisconsin, you have Donald Trump that is leading the charge. And it could well be the deciding factor that pushes him into the White House. Now, joining me to talk about the current status quo and how things are likely to pan out based on the trends that are emerging, I've got Nirav Sheth, who's the Chief Executive Officer of Institutional Equities at Emkay Global Financial, as well as Ajay Bagga, who's market veteran and has watched several elections. Both of you have watched so many elections, and you've also studied what the possible implications would be for India. Nirav, will come to you first. We've already seen some sort of a reaction to the initial trends coming from the United States in the Indian equity markets. The IT pack as a whole running up. Not sure whether or not they're reading this as positive in terms of a Trump victory. What do you think is panning out in the United States? Which way do you think that the winds are blowing, first of all?
Two things. First of all, I think we have to assume, and it's very clear, that Trump is pro-equity simply because of the fact that he propagates tax cuts and stuff like that. So when we talk about equity markets in general, Trump coming back to power should be seen as a risk on trade. Now you have to keep in perspective that we had a serious correction going into the presidential polls, and that was largely because of the fact that you had almost a 4% rally in DXY, which means that when dollar becomes stronger, and largely on the back of both a stronger economy, but also because of the fact that Trump is coming back to power, emerging markets usually be on the flip side of the trade, which means that you had close to about $12 billion of pullback in FI money. Sitting from where you are, the logical trade for the next near term and the medium term would be some sort of pullback in equities. This is the first level of reaction. Then obviously you will get into details in terms of what are the policies Trump is going to follow and so on and so forth. And this is not, it is not very, very easy to templatize this. It's going to be a bit difficult, especially around tariffs and what does it does to bond yields and what it does to dollar. We'll see as we move forward.
Absolutely, Nirav. I have a few follow-ups to that, but I want to get Ajay's view as well on how he's reading the signs right now. Some people are already calling it, Ajay. Would you do so, or would you wait till the final vote is counted?
Because the seven swing votes, swing states will have very low difference in votes. So I think Georgia and North Carolina, because there are not enough votes for Kamala Harris to now catch up, those have been called. Pennsylvania has just been called. And if that is through, then he's at 267. And more or less he's through to 270 then. So overall, very high probability that Trump is the next US president, Alex, as of now.
Okay, so I'm going to come back to you on that one. There has been quite a bit of talk in the run-up, the Trump trade in the US. There are certain stocks that have rallied here in India as well. Is it that cut and dry? Because in the run-up to the election, both of these presidential candidates have, in broad brush strokes, talked about what they want to do, but there are no specifics. One would assume that Trump is going to be more protectionist. He's going to have more tariffs. He has had in the past. He's going to be hard on China, which he has done in the past. So would you be able to take some of those things and gauge what could come about, or would you be a little more cautious as you head into trade, perhaps in the next couple of days?
That's for me, Alex?
Yes, for you.
Yeah. So, one thing is by today, I'm expecting that in the next few hours, Trump will give his acceptance speech, because it's looking very clear now. And hopefully, as he crosses 270, Harris will also concede. So it takes out a big uncertainty from the market. So Indian markets, we have been hit quite badly over the last 4 weeks, and with FI outflows. Now, does it change the ground reality? No. The dollar is strengthening today. We have seen Mexican peso going down 3%, yuan down 1.2%, euro down, yen down, the Hong Kong market going down. So that anti-China is showing up in all the Trump trades. Crypto is going up because he's talking about less regulation. He will defund the regulators. So the US market will see a lot of frothiness continuing with this Trump trade. Cryptos are doing well. Dollar strengthening is negative EM flows. And then it will be negative for the Indian FI inflows as well in the short term. Now, that is the rhetoric. What happens when Jan 20th he actually takes over? China, I think there's a consensus across Democrats and Republicans. Trump is more, you can say, of an outlier with his 60% tariff talk. But that is also a negotiation tool to make China open the rest of its market so they can balance their trade balance. Otherwise, US is not going back to making furniture or making computers again. All the stuff that China is doing or the rest of the world is supplying to the US, despite all the talk of moving manufacturing, the high-end manufacturing, the value-added manufacturing, they would like to bring back into the US. But the commoditized manufacturing is not going to be back in the US. So we have to see it more as a negotiation tool by Trump. For India specifics, we have to see, I would say overall it's more positive than a Democrat Harris coming in for the Indian markets. Flows will continue to be constrained with the strong dollar. Most of the market went in long dollar and long US markets going into the the elections. Trump trade was the consensus trade, and it has worked out. The Fed rate cuts, Alex, also get little postponed and little slower because inflation will catch up. The Trump impact has been calculated by non-partisan bodies as about $7.8 trillion over the next 10 years, while Harris was $4 trillion. So there is a big $1 trillion tax cut, which was expiring end of 2025. That will get rolled over because Trump plus a Republican majority in the Senate will allow him to pass these tax cuts. So Trump tax cuts are on the corporation.
That's a fair point. That's a fair point. And the important point that you just made also is what's happening in the Senate. Nirav, I'm coming back to you. A point that Ajay just mentioned is on the flows, and 1.3 plus lakh crore of outflows on a net basis from the equity markets in this run of 27 consecutive sessions. And this is unprecedented, right? But one would assume that part of that is also on account of the uncertainty before this election result. It's more or less moving towards certainty. Given that we're looking at a high probability of a Trump presidency, and we're looking at a stronger dollar, we're looking at higher inflation, and therefore one would assume relatively higher yields, how do you think those flows will pan out towards the end of this year and heading into next year?
See, I am very constructive on the FI flows. As a matter of fact, eventually there are two things to it, right? You're also looking at the prospect of a growth differential, and then you look at the prospect of currency depreciation. You also have to keep in mind that, what Trump is essentially trying to do. I mean, if you talk about his stated policy directive, he's been talking about the fact that 20% tariff on everything that's imported into the country and 60% on China. What it essentially means is that you're just taking a price level and resetting at a higher level. In terms of competitive dynamic, nothing changes. As a matter of fact, India simply gets better because then the differential between China and India will go to an extent about 40%. That is number one. Secondly, but the stated policy objective of Trump is also that he wants a weaker dollar, right? So, and we also have to keep in mind that all the currency moves, all the bond yield moves are in effect, self-limiting. The markets go up, it sort of catches on and starts curbing the growth. Likewise, when you got a stronger dollar, that is disinflationary, stuff like that. So it's not that you will have a significant leeway for a stronger dollar. And like we always said that, we also have to keep in mind that US is now running a trade deficit after almost running at full employment, right? There's not a very happy situation, right? So there are too much dollar floating around. So I don't have a great view on how dollar is going to play out. And from that perspective, I would like to believe that probably the dollar strength will stall. Bond yields could still be higher, but that also till the time that it starts impacting the growth of US, and then again that will sort of reverse. So to your question, $10 billion is a lot, and for a country like India, when you had some miss in earnings in the current quarter, nothing structural when you look at 26 and 27. Also keep in mind that last 2.5 years, the net inflow of FI is zero. So, a lot of money comes in, a lot of money goes out, right? And if you are under-invested in India, where the hell are you going to go?
One would have said just a month and a half back, China, but I don't know if that's going to continue to be the case given the result that we're heading towards, and whether or not, of course, that economy starts firing on any cylinders at this juncture. One is waiting for what is going to be announced on the fiscal side there. Nothing has come to pass. The question is, how much does policy in the US affect us here in India? And Ajay, I'm curious about what you think. As an investor, primarily in India, how much attention do you pay to what's happening in the US? I take the point that, yes, pharmaceutical industry, big exporter to the United States, several companies, and so therefore pricing is an issue over there. I take the point that IT, Infosys, a large chunk of its earnings coming from the United States, and several other IT companies, so IT and pharma. A few other sectors one would assume, yes, also has some bearing. But then a large part of what's happening in India is the earnings story here, the valuation story here. So how much attention would you pay to what's happening in the US?
No, it is important, Alex, because over the last 4 years, our exports to the US have gone up 44%. So China plus one might have benefited a Mexico or a Vietnam or an Indonesia much more than us, but we have benefited. So 44% better exports to US, and on those, if a 20% tariff comes in, then you have a re-rating of significant sectors of the market. Second, on immigration, Trump is quite tougher than the Democrats. So the H-1B visas, the spouse visas, the naturalization process, of course, the Indian manpower exports are on the higher end. So hopefully he will give some amount of leeway to the Indian manpower sitting in the US. So it is a change in policy. It is pro-US corporations. It is pro-isolationism. It is protectionism, anti-globalization, less of trade. All those issues have a knock-on effect. The immediate effect you're going to see is China depreciating its currency. It happened in 2016-17. They are going to do that. They're going to bring down the yuan and make it cheaper to offset the impact of the Trump tariffs. Now, that will have a second-order effect on Asian currencies, Indonesian to Malaysian to Korean. You will see currency depreciation, and as will the rupee. The other issue will be the Fed will be now wary of cutting rates fast and furious. They will go slowly. So the RBI doesn't cut that fast. That again becomes a drag on our economy. So it is interlinked to that extent, Alex.
It's a fair point. You know, I just want to talk about a few of the numbers that I'm seeing on the screen right now. And if we can pull up that map of the United States just to give you a picture, a snapshot of how things look. Of course, most of the color that you will see on that screen is in fact going to be red. And that really is the story of the hour right now. But most importantly, if you can see some of those states that were highlighted in the run-up to the elections, the likes of Arizona, it's still very close. The gap is actually less than 1%. But in the others, the likes of Georgia, it's pretty much already been called for Trump because the gap is 3%. You have Michigan, where Trump is leading by about 6%. You have Nevada, where the gap is about 4%. You have North Carolina, where the gap, as Ajay pointed out a short while back, it's been called because the gap is about 3%. In Pennsylvania, and that was seen as a very crucial state, to the last day, that was yesterday, you had both Donald Trump as well as Kamala Harris campaigning in Pennsylvania right to the last few hours. There, the gap is about 3% in favor of Trump, and you have Wisconsin as well, where the gap is about 4%. So the way things are looking, ultimately, there's just another few electoral votes that Donald Trump needs to take the walk into the White House. I'm curious about what music he's going to play this time around. We'll wait till that happens, though. Before we call this, though, we still had a scenario laid out, and I'm going to ask Harsh to join in to give you some perspective on what things would mean for